Hey everybody, in this video we're going to take a look at my finger picking technique. So let's dive in and look at the right arm. First off, everything begins with planting. So I like to plant my arm on this part of the guitar here using my inner wrist in the area right above the elbow. So as you can see, I'm planted just like that. And for the second part of the technique, we want to take a look at our right arm wrist. So we want to try and keep a nice and straight wrist if possible. So no bending like that, like that, like that. If you do a bend, I use a little bit of a bend, just kind of like this, but nothing too crazy. Try to keep it relatively straight. Another important point here, we want to try to keep a little bit of space between the inner wrist here and the area above the bridge pickup. So I have about 2 inches, maybe 1.5 inches of space, and that occurs due to the slight wrist tilt here, and also the curvature of my fingers. That being said, let's move on now to taking a look at what the fingers are doing. So first off, let's just start by planting our fingers against all the strings. So we want to try to use all of our fingers if possible, even the pinky, in this technique. And we're going to start by talking about the thumb. So I think it's important to have the thumb in front of the index finger here. So we want to do that because if we have the thumb in front of the index finger, that prevents collision. So something that you'll see sometimes is people with a technique where their thumb goes behind the index finger. Now, I think this is a bad technique because this creates a collision point here, which is just going to lead to some awkward playing and limited speed. So try and get that thumb in front of the index finger. As for the notes that the thumb will play, this will vary depending on what it is you're actually doing, but as a general thing, the thumb usually is playing some of these lower notes on your guitar here, like the E string, the A string, and the D string. And your index, middle, ring, and pinky finger, these guys will be responsible for some of these higher strings. Now, for the hand setup as well, one thing that you should also kind of try and think about is the tilt of your, I suppose, arm relative to the guitar here. So if you plant your fingers on your guitar, as you can see, you can kind of move your wrist like this here. So I think it's good to try and just move your wrist a little bit down towards kind of these electronics, like the pickup selector and stuff like that, just to try and help straighten out that wrist a little bit more and also create a more even contact surface for your fingers. So if we can just bring the fingers just a little bit down like that, or tilt the arm a little bit down like that, things will go a little more smoothly. In terms of the finger setup themselves, my hand pretty much looks like this when I'm playing here. So my fingers are nice and curled, and the contact point for our strings here is going to be right on kind of the pad of the fingers, like so maybe the area just a little bit before the tips. You kind of experiment with what feels good to you there. And the mechanic is basically this. So we're going to pluck the strings and draw them in towards our palm. So when I'm plucking in towards the palm here, I'm kind of imagining that my fingers are going in actually towards my thumb, which I think helps to create slightly more kind of even sensation as I'm playing. As for the thumb, when I click with the thumb here, when I play my note, it's going to brush up against the side of the index finger here. That's totally fine. So that's a kind of collision, but not one that's going to impede your playing here. So again, the thumb is going to hit the index finger. These guys are going to draw towards the palm. And when you've articulated your note here, you want to try as best as possible to just have the finger kind of naturally rebound to its original position. That'll make things feel pretty smooth. Now, another thing that I want to touch on is the idea of planting. So for myself, I'm not a big fan of a fixed planting point, like when you, for example, take your pinky and just leave it down the whole time and use that as a stabilizing point. I'm not a fan of this because if you plant with your pinky, that locks up your ring finger since they share the same tendon. So if you lock up that finger, then there's a more limited capacity as to what that finger is capable of. So yeah, I think it's good to avoid planting if possible. That being said, we can create stability by using the strings as our planting / anchor point. So for example, if I play something like this here, there are a couple things that I can do to help me feel more stable. One thing I can do is actually plant on the strings in anticipation of playing. So before playing this 4-note arpeggio here, my fingers are all rested on the strings before they even play. And another thing that we can do is just push in ever so slightly before we play the note. This will be harder to do at higher tempos, but if I push in a little bit, that gives me a more tactile sensation before I kind of dive in, which will make things feel a little bit easier. And actually, something that I should mention too, back on the finger mechanics, is just a little bit of where the power generation is coming from. So we want to try and generate the power here with kind of the upper, I guess like the upper part of our fingers here. So when I'm plucking, I try to be like relatively loose in the fingertips, and I find that that helps make things go a little better, especially if I'm trying to play like kind of faster stuff here. And we want to try to avoid like really like making these big exaggerated motions here, which you might call like kind of like bicycling, where you're like really like lifting up your fingers and diving in. Just try to keep things relatively tight and efficient. And also, another tip too is try to keep your fingers relatively close together. So try not to have them all kind of like frayed out like that. So anyways, bit of review. We're planting with our right arm using the inner forearm here. Straight wrist, thumb in front of the index finger, slight tilt here to try and even things out a bit. Fingers pulling in towards the palm, generating power with kind of this part here, and keeping relatively relaxed fingertips. So if you can do that, you'll be in good shape. So in this next segment, let's take a look at a couple things that you can use as exercises to practice this technique. Okay, so when it comes to exercises, my favorite are the ones that get every single finger involved. So this first exercise is real simple. We're going to take a 4-note chord. You can pick any chord you want. And we're going to try to pick each note of the chord using a different finger. So we'll use our thumb, index, middle, and our ring finger here. And we're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, ascending from the lowest note to the highest note. So just like this. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. And if you want, you can try moving the chord like. So I'm just moving it chromatically. You can also play around a little bit with the rhythm. So I could go from quarters like 1. Let's start here actually. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2. So these will be eighths. We can do 16ths. We can do triplets, etc. So if you're changing up the rhythm, that's always a good way to work different kinds of movements into your facility and also put your hands into a bit of a different situation, which will help to make the technique practice a little more dynamic. So for the next exercise, we're going to do basically the same thing, but instead of ascending, we're going to descend. So we're going to start on the highest note of the chord here. We'll pick a different one. And we'll just do the same thing. So this one's nice because we get to target what I think would be my weakest finger, which is the ring finger here. So if we start on that finger there, then we can put some mental emphasis on it and really kind of like hone in on it, which will help us to make that finger a little bit stronger and more coordinated. So another thing that I should mention then is the idea of just working out individual fingers. So you don't want to spend too much time doing this, I think, in a single practice session, because that could be something that might lead to some like carpal tunnel or something like that. But like one exercise that I like to do is just practice using my thumb and my ring finger and just go back and forth like this here. You could cycle between different fingers like this here. So this is kind of good because it just kind of isolates the fingers and gives them a little individual workout. Now, one last thing. So these exercises are really good because you'll use these kind of movements in most playing situations, but above all else, you should try just writing some fingerstyle riffs. Try to write things that challenge you. And if you can do that, that'll get you playing and using the fingerstyle technique. And I mean, you want to be able to use these in musical situations, so why not just try to write some music that uses it? That'll get you there a lot faster. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I hope it helped, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.